Hey everyone, well, this is future Adelina jumping in to do an intro because apparently I thought I pressed record but did not. So today's video is the easiest bread you will ever make. For those of you who think you can't make bread, that kneading bread is too hard, you don't have a KitchenAid stand mixer like I do when I make my other recipe, or you physically cannot knead the bread, this is the recipe for you. Making your own bread is such a great skill to learn. And I've said this to my kids before. If you can make bread, then you can eat. Because for pennies, you can make yourself bread, focaccia, buns, pizza dough, anything like that. Super easy. Takes minimal ingredients. You will see how much time there actually is involved in this. The majority of the time is just letting it do its thing. So I am going to show you just how simple this is. So let's go back to past Adelina. Okay, let me show you just how easy this is. We need 3 cups of flour. You can use bread flour or you can use all-purpose flour. And I like the scoop and scrape method of measuring. So there's your flour. 1 teaspoon of this quick rise yeast, or instant yeast, I think they also call it, and you're just adding that to the dry ingredients. We're also adding 1 teaspoon of salt. And then to the water, I'm adding the maple syrup just so that it gets dispersed with the water versus adding it into the dry and having it clump. And that's just to give the yeast something to chew on. All right, so next we're going to just sort of mix this so that the salt and the yeast are mixed in with the flour properly, evenly. And now we're adding this in. And you're going to stir until you have a very sort of wet, shaggy dough. You just want to make sure all of the dry flour at the bottom is incorporated. You don't want a bunch of dry flour. It's going to be much wetter than a regular dough for bread. Okay, that's as simple as, that's all the kneading that you have to do. So let's just get this off here as much as possible. So you can see, very wet, very shaggy dough. And now I'm going to cover it with this silicone cover that I got from IKEA. You can use plastic wrap, you can use a pot lid, whatever you have. And now we're just going to let that sit anywhere from 8 hours, 16 hours, 24 hours even. If you're going to be a long time, you can actually put it in your fridge. But we're just going to let that sit in a warm spot, just on the kitchen counter here, for until tonight. And then tonight I'm going to bake it. So I will see you back here then. Okay, it has been about 9 hours since I did this morning, almost 10. And you can see how nice and bubbly that is. I'm trying to get good light. And it's very soft. That's what we want. So the first thing I'm going to do is preheat my oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Now you want to be sure that whatever parchment paper you use is rated for that, because you don't want it to catch on fire, and you don't want to use wax paper. We're using parchment paper here, which is meant for baking. Okay, so that's preheating, and now we're going to need a Dutch oven. Now, I get asked a lot about this Dutch oven. It's a 6-quart Dutch oven. It's a Cuisinart brand. I bought it at Winners. I think it cost me $40, $45 Canadian. Probably, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. It's enamel coated cast iron. I'm going to put this in the oven while it preheats so that it's ready to go. So we're going to leave it in there. Okay, and I've got these ready for when I'm going to pull it out. So now we're going to get our bread ready to go. Just going to pull out a little bit of flour so that I'm ready. And here's the thing, this is really sticky. And so we're going to want to flour our hands really well, and we're going to want to flour our surface really well. I've got a piece of parchment paper that will fit into the Dutch oven. You'll see what I mean in a second. I'm going to set that aside. And then the next thing I'm going to do is sprinkle flour on top of this. Because again, we don't want our hands sticking to it. And then I'm going to get my hands really floured up. And I'm going to start to just pull it away from the sides. You know, getting more flour on my hands. Sophie's very upset with me because she thinks it's her supper time. Again, it's not. But you'd never guess from listening to her complain. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to fold it over itself, making sure we get lots of flour on here. We're not kneading it, but we're folding it over itself and adding flour. Oops, you don't want it sticking. And what we want to do is form a little ball and sort of pinch it underneath so you get a nice little ball. And then I'm going to lay it on this parchment. Very nice. And I'm going to cut it just to give it some nice sort of pattern when it cooks. And now we're just going to leave that until our oven has preheated, and then we will come back. My oven has finished preheating. I'm going to pull that Dutch oven out of it very carefully because it's very hot. And now I'm going to lift up my bread on the parchment paper and carefully set it in the Dutch oven. Try and sort of fold the paper so that it doesn't cause big dents in the loaf. So that's what you want it to look like. Like I say, I've tried to fold the paper back. So I've got that in there. I'm going to put the lid on it. That's really important. That's what's going to create the steam. And we're going to bake it for 30 minutes. And then I'm going to take the lid off and let it crisp up the top for another 10 to 15. We'll see. Okay, so it's been in there, it was in there for 30 minutes. I'm going to leave it in. I've taken the lid off and I'm leaving it in for another 15 minutes. We'll see. Might need a little bit more. It all depends on your stove, your oven, and your altitude. So, because bread is chemistry. That's what I've learned. So, we will come back when it's done. That looks perfect. So what I'm going to do is lift it out and just let it cool. We're going to let it cool so that we can cut it. Now, you never want to cut your bread warm. It can be slightly warm, but you really want to let it rest, because if you try and cut it when it's still hot, it's just going to be a mess. It's just going to be a mess. It won't cut nicely. So we're going to leave it alone and let it cool off before we have some bread and butter. I actually made 2 batches, and I wanted to test out, because I usually just use my Dutch oven. I wanted to test out how it would work in a loaf pan. So here it is in a loaf pan. I think it turned out just fine. So what we learned from this is, if you don't have a Dutch oven, it will work in a loaf pan as well. Still a little warm. I should probably be waiting, but I don't want to. Okay. Look at that. Look at that. Oh my goodness. It smells so good in here. I swear to God, I could not live without bread. How do I describe it? It's nice and chewy and so good. Like Yum. So, what did we learn from this? There's no excuse to not make your own bread. You saw how fast it was this morning. That was before work. It took me no time at all to make the dough. There was no kneading. You saw it. All I did was stir the ingredients this morning, cover it, and let it sit. It sat for 10 hours. It could sit for longer. If you're going to leave it longer than overnight, say you're going to leave it for 24 hours, I would put it in the fridge just to slow it down a bit. And then all you do is basically fold it a few times, put it either in your Dutch oven or in a loaf pan, and you've got bread for pennies. And it's homemade. There are no preservatives. It's delicious. So now I'm going to put some strawberry jam on this and I'm going to have this for a snack. Anyways, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're staying safe. Remember, in a world where you can be anything, eat good food and be kind, especially to yourself. I love you, and I'll see you next time.